Okay, so there we go for the recording. So again, welcome Tamar Godel. How do you pronounce your surname?
Godel.
Godel. Okay, thank you. Tamar, maybe at first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
So my name is Tamar. I'm American. I'm an English teacher here. I grew up Jewish. My father is from Israel, and my mother's father is a rabbi in America. Um, so I grew up attending a synagogue preschool. I grew up attending Hebrew school pretty regularly. I was very involved in Jewish life as a child. And as a teenager, I was in youth group. I became a Hebrew school teacher and a Jewish educator when I finished high school. And I did that and worked at Jewish day camps for about 10 years until I came to Korea. Now I'm a founding member of one of the progressive synagogues here in Seoul. One of, I say, like there are many, a founding member of the only progressive synagogue here in Seoul called HaKehillah.
Okay. How many synagogues are there in Seoul or in Korea?
So that's sort of a loaded question because synagogue technically refers to the physical space, but that's not, you don't need the physical space in order to engage in most Jewish prayer. The space can be sort of wherever you find it or whatever space you decide to use.
Mhm.
So, as far as I know, there is a single physical actual synagogue in Korea. But I know that there are communities that meet in a number of places. There's the one synagogue is in Seoul in Itaewon. I know that there is a community that meets somewhat regularly on the army base. I don't know what kind of space they have. I would assume that there is a group in Busan, and I know there's a group in Daeju.
Mhm.
Daegu, they're called the
Go.
Daejus,
Oh,
um, as a fun pun. And then there's us.
okay. In your synagogue, how many people are involved there? Or how many people attend there?
So again, that's kind of fluctuating. We don't provide regular weekly religious services.
Okay.
We provide, it's more of a community group, and we do holiday events. So for the various Jewish holidays, we have specific gatherings and events, which of course are somewhat different in Corona times than they used to be.
Yeah. That,
Um,
that, that must be quite different, right?
yes, yes, it is. But
Wow.
I would say our events usually have between 5 and 20 people, depending on what we're doing.
Okay, okay. Um, I read somewhere that the Torah can only be read in a synagogue if there's about 8 men or 8 people. Is that still valid?
Uh, okay, so there's a specific word in Hebrew called minyan.
Yeah.
In English, it's often pronounced minion, like the little yellow guys.
Yeah.
Um, and it means a group of 10 adults.
10. Okay, 10.
If you are Orthodox, only men count as being those adults. Um, and to be an adult means you're past the age of Jewish adulthood and not legal adulthood of whatever country. So you just need to be older than 13.
Oh,
Teenagers count as adults, which is pretty cool. There are certain prayers and certain activities that require a minion. So some prayers are said usually alone. The prayers before and after eating, the prayers when you wake up and go to bed. Those are individual and personal prayers, but then there are other prayers that pretty strictly require there to be a group,
mhm.
and the rabbis define a group as 10. You can, there are like ways to sort of fake having 10. So, like, if you have 9, you can pull a Torah out and count the Torah as the 10th person.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm not entirely sure why, and I
Wow.
didn't know about that practice until an adult. I haven't researched it. But I mean, you need to do the prayers every morning, and if you can't get 10 people, you got to do them. And so they were like, the Torah counts as a human. Do it.
So you have to be creative.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You spoke about, you said that you are in a progressive congregation, and then you also mention what was the other congregations, Orthodox?
Yes.
What kind of congregations are there? Are
Okay.
there others as well?
So there's a number of like denominations within Judaism.
Mm.
I can't at all compare them to the denominations within Christianity because
Mm.
I don't know. I can separate Christianity into Catholic and not Catholic, and that's all I know.
Okay.
But in Judaism, we have the three major ones are Reform, Conservative, Orthodox.
Okay.
There's also Reconstructionist.
Okay.
And then within Orthodox, there's like a number of different clubs, I guess, depending on which rabbi you think was right in different situations or
yes.
which rabbi you follow.
Mm. Mm.
The major differences are how strictly and why you follow various rules. So, for example, there's a lot of rules about food. We call that keeping kosher or kashrut.
That's right. Yeah.
And Orthodox people, one of the big ones is separating milk and meat. Orthodox people will sometimes even go so far as to have like two separate kitchens. Or in the US, I saw a kitchen once that was like one oven, but then like two refrigerators, two sinks, two stoves, two countertops, and everything. In conservative households, they tend to separate milk and meat. So a meal will be either a dairy-based meal or a meat-based meal. And then Reform Jews, it's sort of a personal decision. A lot of Reform Jews look at the various rules or laws as an opportunity for education and an opportunity for like consideration of why. So growing up, we ate milk and meat together, but then there's like a number of foods that are just considered not kosher, just straight up not allowed. And I never ate those, not because my parents felt it was important to not eat those, but because my parents didn't eat those foods growing up. And so it never, like, it just wasn't part of their diet. So, for example, pigs are considered not kosher, and my parents aren't against eating pork, but it's really hard to find it in Israel. Like, you have to really try.
Okay.
And so my dad is generally lazy, and so he never ate pork just out of coincidence. He just like never bothered to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious why milk and meat. Why do you?
So Jews like rules. We really like rules. There's a specific line in the Torah in the section about food rules, and it says you shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk.
Okay.
And kid in this case refers to a baby goat, right? Not a human child. We don't eat people. But then the rabbis are saying, okay, well, how can you know for sure which, like, that the milk came from this goat's mother? How can you know for sure, if you're mixing your milk, you don't like separate your milk by goat.
Oh.
Right. And so they were like, okay, then we should separate all of the goat meat and the goat milk. And then they were like, okay, and what if like you happen to have cow's milk? So generally we separate milk and meat to like make very, very sure that there's no chance that you would ever do this terrible thing.
I see. That's very, very interesting. Thank you. And maybe I can ask one of our students. You must burn with questions. Who wants to ask a question? Anyone?
May I, Professor?
Yes, yeah, sure.
I wanted to ask about Jewish New Year, how it's different from others' New Year, and what do you do at this day? I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's Rosh Hashanah.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So Judaism follows a lunar calendar, but unlike Islam, we correct. We have not leap years every so often. We have an extra month because our holidays are pretty seasonal. So they do move around a little bit, but they do follow the seasons. So Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. It literally means head of the year. It happens in the fall, and it's the first of a series of pretty important holidays that come in a cluster. The New Year, so we have these two holidays that are pretty closely tied. We have Rosh Hashanah, and then 10 days later we have Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement or the Day of Repentance. And we say that Rosh Hashanah starts the year and that Rosh Hashanah ends the old year and that Yom Kippur starts the new year. And in those 10 days in between, you're kind of in this weird liminal space between years. The celebration itself is we eat apples dipped in honey so that we should have a sweet year. We eat the bread that we traditionally eat is braided, and on this holiday we make it in a round shape to show the cyclical nature of the year. It's sort of a good time to take stock of your life and think about what kind of person you are, what kind of person you are trying to be. And there's a lot of deep reflection about like trying to make that come to fruition and sort of trying to rethink who you are and how can you achieve being who you want to be. Yom Kippur is when we say that the book of life is sealed. So in those 10 days, God makes these like last minute decisions about who's going to die this year and who's going to be okay this year and what's going to happen to everybody this year. And so one thing that I find interesting about Judaism that I haven't seen in many other religions is like this idea of repentance. From what I understand in Christianity, you like if you do something bad, you go tell a priest about it and they're like, oh, say 5 prayers and then you're fine. But in Judaism, that's very much not the case. If you mess up, you have to deal with that problem. So you have to go actually talk to the person you wronged and be like, hey, look, I really messed up. This is a thing I did and I'm sorry. And you can't just say like, oh, I'm sorry, but you have to show through a number of ways that you actually really mean it. You have to show that you have fixed your ways, that you won't do this kind of thing again, that you have provided reparations for what you're doing. And all of that sort of happens as part of the New Year the New Year season, because you want to go into the new year like fresh and free from having messed up.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you also fast?
So on Yom Kippur, it's one of the fast days. Anyone who is over the age of 13, over the age of bar mitzvah, of b'nai mitzvah, is supposed to fast. There are exceptions, right? So if you're pregnant, you don't fast. If you have a medication that requires food, you don't fast. If you have an eating disorder, you don't fast. If there's any medical reason why you shouldn't be, you don't fast. And the fasting is not meant as a deprivation. The fasting is meant to help you focus only on like really becoming close with God and really just like fixing everything that you should have fixed in the last year. It's not depriving yourself, it's like clearing your mind.
Thank you.
That's a very important festival, right? The Yom Kippur is probably the most important one of the whole year, right?
Yeah, it's one of the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 most important.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Thank you. Who has another question?
Oh, I see one in the chat.
This one in chat. me just open that.
It says, I will establish a prophet for them from among their brothers like you, and I will place my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I shall command him. And that's from Dvarim. I don't actually know who that prophet is. Dvarim is what, Numbers? Deuteronomy? I should know my Hebrew books.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I'm really not sure. There's a lot of prophets mentioned throughout the Torah. The most well-known is Moses, but there's an entire book of, so we have the Torah, which is the 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's those first 5 books. But then we have the Tanakh, which is the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. Nevi'im is the prophets. So after the Israelites got back to Israel, the Torah ends with them like about to step into Israel, and then it's done. They don't actually get into Israel, and we start over at the beginning. If you read the prophets, it's a whole period where the Jews were living in Israel and sort of like vaguely governed by prophets. It was a whole series of like the Israelites living their life and then sort of going astray a little bit. And then God was like, no, don't do that. And threw down a prophet to make the Israelites stop going astray. And then they were like, oh, sorry, we repent. And then we start the cycle all over again. The prophet's like, okay, I did my job. And then they're like, maybe we're going to do something bad again. And then another prophet throws down.
Are there any prophets now? Do you believe in prophecy at this point?
No. Do I personally? No.
Yeah.
Does Judaism? Not really, no.
Mm-hmm. So the time of the prophets is gone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that was a fruitful time. Thank you. Any other questions?
May I?
Yes.
As I have heard, like Saturday is some kind of special day for Jews, right? And why? Could you please explain this?
So first of all, the Jewish day starts at sundown. So it's not like Saturday from sunrise to sunset. It's from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. And that's the Sabbath day. So a lot of different religions have different Sabbath days. And for Judaism, it's Saturday. As for why we have a Sabbath day, if you look at the creation story, the first day God separated light from the heavens from the earth, and the second day light and darkness, and so on. And on the 7th day, it says God rested. And so we take it as tradition to rest on the 7th day. And in Judaism, the 7th day is Saturday, is Shabbat. In fact, in Hebrew, the days of the week don't have names. It's like Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, which means like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, Shabbat. So it's just numbered until the Sabbath. And so it's a special day. You rest on that day. As for what's considered rest, that depends a little bit on each branch of Judaism and on the individual person.
Thank you. Do you keep the Sabbath? Can I ask that?
No, I don't.
Okay, you do. Okay, great. Another question, maybe it's a tricky question. I don't want to trick you in something. Do other Jews accept the creation story as history or as mythology?
That's, again, like kind of, it depends on the individual Jew and on the branch of Judaism. So Orthodox Jews are pretty insular, and as a result, I don't have a whole lot of contact with the theology of many Orthodox Jews. Like I have cousins who are Orthodox Jews, but we don't talk about theology, talk about other things. I would say that for the most part, especially in progressive Judaism, the majority of the Torah is not taken as fact. It's taken as this, story that was really important to our people for so long. And how and why is it still important is the question.
Okay.
So what kinds of things can we learn from this story? What kinds of messages were important at the time and might still be important now?
So it's sort of historical narratives, but it's part of the oral tradition, later becomes scripture, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Questions, ladies and gentlemen?
So I see one in the chat. Somebody asked, what do you
Oh.
believe will happen after people die?
Yes.
And the answer to that is there's about as many answers to that as there are Jews. The general belief, I would say, is that so there's this idea that one day the world will be perfect. And whenever that day comes, the Messiah will sort of bring or herald the coming of this perfect world. And everyone who was worthy in their life will be brought back to life to experience and enjoy, we call Olam Haba, which means the world that is yet to come, or the world that will come. Now, as for the Messiah, him or herself, a lot of Orthodox Jews, I found out much to my surprise, are still like actively waiting for the Messiah. Most Reform and conservative Jews, most progressive Jews have sort of seen that as this like mythology and this not actual thing that's going to happen, and we're just trying to make the world a better place to live in now as we exist. Some people believe that, you know, you're going to go to heaven. Judaism doesn't super have a belief in hell. There's not really a whole lot of punishment once you're dead. You're just not worthy to be brought back to life. But for the most part, once you're dead, you're just dead. Because of that idea of bringing people back to life, there's this pretty important, so first of all, Jewish burial practice is kind of interesting. We do not embalm, and you try and, as a result, you have to try and bury the person within 24 hours. I'm gonna guess that's probably because after 24 hours, a dead body starts to rot. But also, there's a lot of people who will not be buried in a casket or in a coffin. They'll just be buried sort of wrapped in a shroud, because they want the fewest barriers between themselves and the earth so that they can decompose as quickly as possible, but also so that like they're sort of all together and easy to free when they come back. And it's called the Hever Kadisha. It's people in Israel. It was especially relevant when there were a lot of bombings, but when people die in ways that their bodies are in multiple pieces, this group sort of does their best to gather all the pieces and make sure they're all buried in the same place so that they can be brought back as a single human.
Do you believe in cremation?
Do I personally, or what is Judaism's
Maybe
view?
Judaism, and also yourself, maybe?
I think cremation is a great idea. There's, you know, a lot of people dying, and the earth itself is literally running out of space to put the dead bodies. So cremation seems like a great packaging option. As for Judaism, that question is sort of loaded after the Holocaust,
Yes.
when a lot of Jews were just burned. And so people don't really want to evoke that, I guess, anymore. They're trying to, stay away from that.
Yeah. I guess that green burials will sort of take on, and this is quite popular, maybe.
What do you mean by green burials?
There's all kinds of new green burials where they put you in some kind of compost, and a tree grows from you. There's a whole lot of that.
That's so
going
cool.
around.
I didn't know.
Yeah, they're very innovative with this.
That's awesome.
Yeah. they got a whole, I'm not sure exactly where the place is, but they got a whole forest of people
Wow.
growing now. Yeah, so
Nice.
interesting. Thank you. Other questions?
So can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
So what do you believe what do you believe about how the earth is going to end?
So I mean, if you're asking about like Armageddon and the rapture, that's not part of Jewish belief. Sort of the end, I guess, is when the earth is considered perfect again, when everything is just, 100% great, everything is wonderful, then theoretically, God would send Elijah to herald the coming of the Messiah and the new world, the world that is yet to come, and just everyone will live happily ever after. There's not really any like fiery death or big explosions or anything.
Good. Thank you. Interesting that you talk about Elijah. I know that in certain circles, especially when I think with a cedar meal and so on, that you have a chair for Elijah, an open chair. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So we believe that Elijah's a prophet, one of the many. And interestingly, Elijah didn't actually die. He sort of ascended in a fiery chariot. And there's a lot of debate about what that means. Like a fire wagon going to the sky is a very abnormal concept. But as such, Elijah isn't actually considered dead. Elijah is considered just like a different being now, which gave rise to a lot of interesting debate about marriage and divorce and various like definitions thereof. But we believe that Elijah is going to announce the coming of the Messiah. So there's a couple occasions when we specifically and explicitly welcome Elijah. So one of them is at the birth of, or at the bris of every baby boy. It would be girls too, but patriarchal history. At the birth of every baby boy, you sort of leave out a chair for Elijah, the idea being that Elijah's coming to every bris to check if this baby is the Messiah. And then actually this weekend is the holiday of Passover, and we open the door for Elijah, sort of welcoming Elijah to come to our Seder, and we have a specific glass of wine that's like just for Elijah. And much like Santa, he theoretically goes to every Jewish home and drinks some wine and like looks over the assembled guests to be like, any Messiah here? No. Next house, more wine. And there's a lot of memes and comics these days about how drunk Elijah must be after the third or fourth house. Like, that's a lot of wine. Usually you send the youngest child to go open the door for Elijah. And while the children aren't looking, the leader of the Seder will sort of pour out some of the wine, and maybe they'll shake the table so it looks like Elijah's drinking the wine, sort of, so that children sort of like have this belief. Because again, adults can conceptualize like non-physical beings and non-physical situations. So adults can see Elijah as more of like a presence or a concept, but younger children are very concrete, and so you need to make it very physical and real for them.
Can you tell us a bit more about the Seder meal at Passover? That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so Passover is the story of the Exodus. It's the story of the Jews leaving Egypt and not getting to Israel for another 40 years. Terrible GPS. Egypt and Israel are right next to each other. But it's sort of a significant time in the Torah timeline, because we went from just being like a whole bunch of people who like we didn't have the rules until then. Until then, we were just, you know, people who happened to mostly be related. We were all the sons of Jacob or the children of Jacob or descendants. But we weren't in any clear ways except like family tradition. We weren't explicitly different from the general populace. You know, we tend to do these things because our family has always done them, but there's no like rules about it. And the story of the Exodus and Moses, the prophet, sort of helping us out there and God saving us from the Egyptians is shortly thereafter we got the Torah, we got the 10 Commandments and became this group, this explicit, separated group from the general populace. So it's a pretty important story in the Jewish timeline. It really makes clear how we are a unit, we are a group. The general story is there was so one of Jacob's sons had gone down to Egypt and helped out the Pharaoh. He interpreted a dream about 7 years of great crops and then 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh was like, oh, wow, you can tell the future through my dreams. That's awesome. Help me out, help me organize how to save my people from this famine. And so Joseph, the particular person, sort of helped out by making sure that in these years of excess, stuff was put aside so that in the years of famine, they would have enough crops. But then it says that there arose a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. So the years passed, and in this time, many Israelites at the time, not Jews yet, had come to Egypt and were living there. And this new Pharaoh sort of thought, oh, maybe they're going to overthrow me. And as a result, was specifically trying to get rid of the Jews. And one method was to kill all the baby boys, thinking that would make the Jews as a whole, or the Israelites as a whole, like a weaker people. Moses's mother, according to the story, was like, oh no, don't kill my baby, and put him in a basket in the water. And Pharaoh's daughter happened to see him in the water and pulled him out. And so he was raised as a prince of Egypt, and then sort of realized later as an adult, oh no, I'm Jewish, and this is what's happening to the Jewish people. You know, they're slaves here, and I am one of the slaves. I'm a child of slaves. How could this be? And this is illustrated surprisingly accurately in the DreamWorks movie Prince of Egypt. So great soundtrack if you want to watch a good movie. So we escaped, right? There's these 10 plagues. We escaped from Egypt. The Passover Seder is it's the first or second night of Passover, and it happens every year, and it's a retelling of this story. So this story with the going into Egypt and being in Egypt and then leaving Egypt is really significant. And so we have Seder means order. So it's this very carefully organized meal that we retell the story, and we talk about all of the steps of the story, sort of reminding ourselves and going over it again and making sure our children know. And it's meant to make it feel very personal, that it wasn't just this thing that happened long ago, but that, you know, the act of being free, the act of redemption is sort of a constant thing that all people are still going for. There's a line as part of the Seder that, like, until all people are free, we aren't free. And so these days, I can mostly speak to the American Jewish experience, but these days, especially in America, people are tying the Seder especially to a lot of social justice, making others aware of various other situations in the world, various other genocides that are happening these days, other situations where people are enslaved or not free, and doing explicit work about that, trying to make sure that all people on earth are free and do have this freedom. The Seder itself, we have a plate with a number of symbolic foods and items. And we use those kind of as props to tell the story. So one of the items I made last night, it's called faroset, and it's this paste kind of usually dried fruit and wine. We make ours out of nuts and apples and wine and raisins, but theoretically it could be anything. And it's delicious, and it's meant to represent the mortar between the bricks that the slaves were made to use while building. And then there's salt water and bitter herbs to represent the bitterness of slavery. So they're used as props to sort of help tell this story.
That got you got honey in that as well. Am I
Can
right?
do.
In
No
the
reason not to.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I didn't
usually
because
put honey
we have
in.
a vegan coming to ours, but no reason not to.
Okay, yeah. It's an incredibly interesting meal, and you also still blow the shofar, right?
Not at Passover.
Not a
But
really? Okay, not
yeah.
Passover. Okay.
If anyone is interested in attending a virtual Passover Seder, this year Hakeilah, we're having like 4 people in person, but we're also streaming and having a virtual Seder. So I'll send a link to your teacher, and you're welcome to sign up. We'll do one this Saturday night and one on Sunday night for the first 2 nights of Passover. You're more than welcome to join.
Well, I would love to join.
Yeah.
So yeah, please send it to me. I would love to join.
Of course.
Good. Okay, more questions. We've got a few minutes, so more questions. Yeah, sure.
Can you please tell us more about the mourning stages?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of rules around death. When somebody dies, the community focus immediately goes to their family. For the most part, the dead person is dead, and the living people are still here with us, and you need to support them because this is a horrible time in their life. And the rabbis lay out this interesting, not pattern, sort of like stages of what to do at any given point to support the mourners. So there are rules, for example, for the first 7 days, and then for the first 30 days, and then for the first year, of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And it's not meant to restrict the mourners. It's meant to sort of ease them back from this horrible time into regular life. So the funeral happens within 24 hours, which is really abrupt sometimes. It's, normal in Judaism, it's normal for us, but I didn't know until, as a child, you don't really go to a whole lot of funerals. So when I was probably in high school or university, I started sort of realizing, I assumed that 24 hours is the norm. Like, someone dies right away in the ground. Like, what else are you going to do with them? And I sort of started consuming more media, watching movies, watching TV, and seeing that you could delay funerals by like weeks until everyone shows up. And that was very weird to me. So after the funeral, you all usually go to the home of the family, and who the family is sort of depends on who died. It'll usually be the home of the deceased spouse or the home of like one of their children. So for example, if my grandparents died, everyone would probably go to my mom's house because my aunt and uncle are slightly disasters. Safta, if you see this, I'm so sorry. My grandmother found last semester's recording. So everybody would probably go to my parents' house. And then I can't think of another word to describe it other than like a social event. You go as a show of support, and it's visiting mourners, right? So for the first week, traditionally you would just go. Everybody goes to their house and you're just there for a week. and you're not everybody's there the entire week, but like anytime within that week you come. These days, people will sort of post with their synagogue the hours. They're like, okay, we're receiving people for the next week between like 4 and 8 p.m. And you don't call ahead, you just go. And you usually bring food because they shouldn't have to cook. They shouldn't have to worry about those things. So you sort of like deal with everything for them. The mourners themselves, so you'll cover all mirrors in the house because they shouldn't care about their appearance. They shouldn't have to stress out about like, what do I look like? There are so many people here. There's so many guests. Am I wearing makeup? Do I have my lipstick? That shouldn't be a concern. And so you cover mirrors so that they're just not even thinking about it. They'll usually sit on the floor or on a very low stool. And then each day you have like a pretty basic prayer service. But one reason we make sure there are so many people is I mentioned earlier that some prayers can be done alone and some prayers you need to have a group. And the prayer of mourning, you need to have 10 people, you need a group. And that's also because, you need community support in that time. So some people will go to synagogue and say this prayer, but very often you just can't bring yourself to leave your house. And so the community comes to you to help you with the obligation of saying this prayer of like comforting you. For the next 30 days, I haven't, thank God, experienced it, but for the like children and siblings of the deceased, and God forbid their parents also, you don't shave, you don't listen to music, you don't dance. I think there's a couple other things that you like explicitly don't do, and it sort of eases up as you go through the year. And then every year on the like anniversary of their death, it's called a yahrzeit, and you light a candle that burns for 25 hours and you say this specific prayer again.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
More questions? We have a minute or two. Yeah. Who wants to have a question?
So, do you believe in the Jesus Christ?
So I personally suspect that Jesus was a historical figure, but Jesus has no significance in Judaism. He was just a rabbi, just a guy who studied and had some ideas. Judaism as a whole, I mean, he's certainly not the Messiah, according to Judaism.
What do you think? Thank you for the question. This is just a curious question. What do you think of Christians trying to convert Jews and going to Israel and do this kind of Israel for Christians thing? What do you think of that?
Yeah, big no thank you.
No, is that big?
No thank you.
Okay. And Jews that convert to Christianity, what are they standing in the communities?
So it's interesting because Judaism is what we call an ethno-religion.
Okay.
So in Judaism, even if you convert out, you're still ethnically Jewish.
Okay, that's interesting.
And part of that is because there have been historically a number of times when Jews were forced to convert. And, you don't want people who were forced to choose between conversion and death to now be excluded from the community because they chose life. If you have a cousin who decides to go practice Christianity, fine, do what you need to do. But what wouldn't be okay is converting and then trying to convert other Jews.
Okay, so that kind of missionary work.
Exactly. Judaism is very firm on no missionaries.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, thank you so much. Maybe a last question or two, last one.
How different is the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament?
So I guess I don't know what you're referring to as the Hebrew Bible. I know the Old Testament is the 5 books of Moses. So like Genesis through Deuteronomy, and we call that the Torah. It can be either in just like a physical book for convenience, but it's typically written on this like giant scroll thing. I would guess that what most people call the Hebrew Bible is what we call the Tanakh. So Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So those 3 books, the Torah itself, those 5 books, and also the writings and also the prophets. So if I understand what you mean by Hebrew Bible, then the Torah is part of the Hebrew Bible. It's a third of it.
Can I just come in here?
Yes.
The Hebrew Bible we take that as sort of the Old Testament for Christianity. So the Old Testament, yeah, I think that's maybe the question. What is the difference between the Christian Old Testament and the total of the Hebrew Bible as such, the Tanakh?
Okay. Yeah, so the Old Testament is the first part of the Tanakh.
Okay, so that's how you see that. Okay. But is there a huge difference between the Christian Old Testament and the Tanakh?
I mean, I think the Christian Old Testament is just what I call the Torah. It's just those 5 books, the 5 books of Moses. We Jewish people don't call it the Old Testament. It's one of those things like, you know, first you just had TV, and then when TV had color, you had to, it's a retronym. You had to then call the old TV black and white TV.
Yeah.
We just called it mail until there was email, and then you call it snail mail.
Yeah. Sure.
So we only call it the Torah. We see no reason to call it the Old Testament because for us, there is no New Testament.
Yes, of course.
But then the Tanakh, I'll write that in the chat so you can see it. Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. There. It's an acronym, TN and then a Chaf, for those three sections. So Torah is what you would call the Old Testament, and then the prophets and the writings are the 2 other parts.
Thank you. Last question?
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
I heard that Jewish people think books are like one of the most important things in their life. And I was wondering how books became so important to Jewish people.
So it's not like books. It's not like when you go to the library, we're super excited. When we're talking about the book, we're talking about the Tanakh. And we're called the people of the book because it's like this specific book is super important to us. But generally, Judaism, I don't know about these days, because these days access to education is limited by other factors. But I know that in historic Christianity, only the pastor, only the religious leader could read the word of God and told the congregation, the usually illiterate congregation, what was said, what God said. I'm talking, Middle Ages and before. But in Judaism, we find it really important for certainly all boys, but also a lot of girls. Historically, Judaism found it very important for most people to be able to read. And there's no reason that anyone shouldn't be able to read the word of God. That was, from what I understand, a big part of the Protestant Reformation, that Martin Luther was like, hey, why shouldn't everyone be able to read the Bible? Let's put it in the native language of the people instead of just in, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, so that everyone can access the word of God and understand what's going on. And Judaism was very much that way from the beginning. And that separated us from a lot of other peoples, other groups, because everyone could read.
Thank you. That's a good question. Okay. You guys done with questions?
I'm going to say, if you guys have more questions, if you're interested, I'm going to be teaching an Intro to Judaism class starting on Sundays in mid-April. I think I've sent a link to your professor as well. It's a university curriculum. So American Jewish University in California has an Intro to Judaism program, and we sort of took their curriculum and their textbooks, and we're going to be teaching it here. There will be the class will be led in English with Korean assistance. So if you know anyone who needs that, let us know. There is a Korean speaker who will join us. And it will last, I think, about 18 weeks and cover sort of Jewish history and modern Jewish practice.
That's a very interesting course. I was looking at it just before the class. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, I can see the syllabus also.
Yes, so I'll put the link also on the LMS, so you guys can access that. So if you want that, are there any Koreans who converted to Judaism that you know of?
I think there's one. So one trick or one catch, I guess, is the conversion process requires it requires a rabbi who's willing to help you through the process. And it requires something called a Beit Din, which is like a council of rabbis who sort of, I guess it's like a thesis committee. They're like judging you, but kindly. It's more about, they're more checking in like, why do you want to do this? And not like, do you know enough? So the first problem, a rabbi who's sympathetic, there is one non-military rabbi in Korea, and he does not do conversions. He just personally, he doesn't do it. If we had a different rabbi, it might be a different situation, but we have what we have. And there isn't a Beit Din. There are a couple other Asian communities where they have, only the one rabbi in the whole country. And periodically, a number of Asian rabbis will get together, and potential converts will all go and sort of have their thesis defense right in a row.
A rabbi must be a Jewish born Jew, right?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I know a lot of rabbis. I don't know who converted. So another, like in Judaism, we sort of consider converts to be Jewish souls who were just not here yet. And it's considered, just like in America, as a country with so many immigrants, it's really rude to say to somebody who like doesn't look like you, oh, where are you from? Why did you come here? Where did you come from? Right? You don't want to, it's rude to show that you think that they're different from you. And it's the same with converts. You don't, unless they bring it up, you don't bring it up. You sort of consider them a Jewish soul from the start. Now that they've done the conversion, they're Jews. That's it, the end.
Okay, that's also very interesting. That they regard it as Jewish souls as such.
Yeah.
And that opens a whole new conversation, of course.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. I think, Tamar, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's every time I learn something new, and the Judaism as such is one of the most interesting religions one can study. Every time there's some new nuances that I see and learn from. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm gonna pop, hold on, info at
please.
Korea. If you have any questions in the future, any of the students, if you want to follow up on anything, feel free to email us, and someone is more than happy to answer. We're also on Facebook.
Okay, yes. Yeah, you can befriend them or like them on Facebook.
There we go.
Thank you, Tamar, so much. And hopefully we'll see you next time.
I hope
And
so.
happy Passover for you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions.